There we go. Welcome everyone to today's session. We're so glad that you're able to join us in person or on the recording. Just so everyone knows, today we have kind of a buy one, get one free day. I'm just thrilled to have Robin Faria joining us from UCLA. If you Google Biosketch and want to see someone out there who's done a lot of YouTube videos on how to do a Biosketch, you're going to find this person, and all her videos are one of the highest ranked. So that is why I honestly stone cold emailed this woman and she agreed to help us out, because I just can't thank you enough for helping us out on this. I was chuckling yesterday because one of the most senior geneticists on the East Coast emailed me and said, I was told I have to do this Biosketch thing. What is that and how do I do it? And I wanted to start laughing that, you know, even people at the end of their careers are dealing with Biosketches, and actually I'm recording it also for him. He's going to watch this later tonight. So we're just thrilled to have you with us. And then after Robin's done, if people want to stay on with me, I'm going to show you a few new things I added onto the LearnRD website. We have access to some more rare disease training programs. If you would want to use them, you're welcome to do so. So I want to show people how to get to those if you want to stick on at the end of Robin's time. But Robin, we're just so thankful that you were willing to do this for us. I can't thank you enough for emailing me back to a cold, random emailer. I just really appreciate your time today. So take it away, Robin.
Absolutely. Well, that was probably the nicest introduction I've ever had, so that's great. Just to give you guys some background, I'm Director of Operations for UCLA's CTSI Grant Submission Unit, and basically what that means is we are just a group of administrators who basically help investigators do all the nitty-gritty paperwork, administrative infrastructure stuff that needs to get done to get grants out the door. And we specialize in particularly complex and large grant applications, so it's not unusual for us to review, 100 biosketches per application. So we go through a lot of these, and that sort of required us to sit back and think how can we operationalize this? How can we make it more efficient? And every single time NIH comes up with new rules, we're okay, let's learn the rules and figure out how to address them. And we just, our CTSI is very interested in getting these things online and available to other CTSAs and just making them available for other people, because we all have to deal with these NIH Biosketches, and it's better if we can just, share our own lessons learned in case it helps other people, which it sounds like it has. So today I have just a few slides, and essentially what I wanted to do was for those of you that are either unfamiliar with Biosketches entirely or just not sure how you want to address these new changes, I'm going to go over the changes that occurred in 2015 and then the new ones on top of that from this year. I'm going to focus specifically on Section A, which is the personal statement, and Section C, which is the contribution to science, only because those are the two primary ones that have changed the most in the last 2 years. I'm also going to talk about techniques for strengthening your Biosketch, talk about some administrative components, challenges faced by new investigators, and sort of some tips and tricks that we've developed along the way to kind of help mitigate those issues, and then go over the dreaded URL issue that people have been having lately and kind of talk about some solutions around that. So in 2015, there were some major changes that happened to the Biosketch. So for those of you that had done a Biosketch before, it used to be only 4 pages, and you could list up to 15 publications in your Section C. Format's all different. There's a new heading section. You have up to 5 pages now. Your personal statement can even include up to 4 publications under it. And then Section C got changed from publications to contributions to science. And you can have up to 5 contributions, which are, we'll get into them later, but they're basically narrative text that describes what you have done to contribute to science in your field over the course of your career. You can have up to 5 of those, and each of those can have up to 4 publications or products. And we'll talk later about exactly what products mean if you're not sure. And then you can now include a URL which links to a complete list of your published work. So instead of trying to list them all on your Biosketch, you can just provide a link that works, and then people can go access it as they need to. So in 2016, they came up with some additional changes. One was new font guidelines. Essentially, it just kind of increased the type of font that you can use. So I'm not going to get into that because there's just a whole slew of rules, but if you're interested, you could look up the notice on it and kind of see if you're one of those people that likes to play around with fonts. They clarified that URLs that you include must have a .gov address because some people had been using ones that did not have that, and now they're changing it just to make it safer for reviewers, that they're not clicking on, spam or, things that might have viruses. The personal statement publications can now also include non-peer-reviewed publications and additional products. So this is really helpful for newer investigators who maybe don't have as many peer-reviewed publications out there but have some other things that they've done that would be of note that you could include. And then clarification for this year that graphics, figures, and tables are not allowed. So basically no images are to be put on the Biosketch. Section A, that's essentially where you put your personal statement. So the premise of it is the same as it has been in years before. You basically just use a couple sentences, a paragraph or two, to explain what your qualifications and relevance are to the particular project that you were applying to. The clarification that they gave is they actually gave some examples of how you can add what those relevant factors are. So you can talk about your training, any previous experimental work you've done, what your technical expertise is, the collaborative or scientific environments in which you've worked that have sort of led to these developments, and then talk about your past performance in very related fields. And they also mention that anything that doesn't quite fit in your contribution to science section can also be added into your personal statement. And one thing to remember about this is there are no space limitations on your personal statement. So if you're a new investigator, you don't have a lot of contributions to science you think yet, the personal statement, we have people who their personal statement is a page long. You can really beef it up and add things that maybe don't quite fit in other sections and really talk about how you are qualified to participate on the particular application. And what we really like to see in our office is that personal statements are tailored to the specific project. So if you're not the PI, we don't want you to have a sentence in there saying, I am qualified to lead this project. We see that get copied and pasted a lot, and that's not something we would recommend. And now you can include up to 4 publications / products, depending on what you have, in your personal statement, which increases the total amount of publications that you can list in your overall Biosketch. So some techniques that we think you should consider when you're sort of trying to figure out how to craft your personal statement. You want to make sure it's tailored to the project. It helps if you refer to the proposal and what the specific needs are, and then emphasize what the project's need is for your particular expertise, and then reference your 4 most relevant publications. So if you ended on a sentence that says something like, I have X amount of publications, but I'm just listing the 4 most relevant to this project, and then really curate that list very carefully. It can show, highlight in a very strong way how relevant your work has been to the particular role that you would be taking on this project. So you always want to choose your strongest references. And one thing to note is the publications don't have to be your own. So if you contributed to something and it led to the development of a manual that everybody uses now, but it's not necessarily your publication, you can still include it. There's no rules against that. It's just they want you to choose the publications or products that are the strongest, whether that's your own or something that's sort of tangential. That's perfectly fine. We also think that it helps if you name your collaborators or prior collaborations that you've had that are relevant to the proposal. So if you've worked with a PI before, or there's a particular application team and you've worked with them in the past, it always really helps to solidify what that relationship is, because a lot of reviewers are getting nitpicky about whether these teams can work together. Have they worked together in the past? And the Biosketch personal statement is a great place to talk about that. I'm skipping past section B. That's just a list of your honors, awards, positions, employment. You can pull that straight off of your CV. It's pretty easy. But section C is now called Contribution to Science. It used to be called Publications. And this is where I think a lot of people get into the biggest issue, because it is a lot more work than it used to be. So as I mentioned before, there's a maximum of 5 contributions that you can write, and each of those contributions can have 4 publications or products. So I'm highlighting this only because we see a lot of mistakes where people put 5 contributions and 5 publications, and that's not the case. It's 5 and 4. So what is a contribution? Well, basically you want to write something in paragraph form that includes the following points. You want to talk about the historical background that frames whatever scientific problem you're addressing. Talk about what the central findings of your study were, what the influence of that findings is or will be if it's new, and then try and apply what those findings are going to be or have been to either health or technology. And then it's always really strong if you end by talking about what your specific role in that work was originally. So one thing to note about this is that each of these contributions has a space limit of a half page per contribution. So NIH doesn't have any software that's checking for the exact page, whatever, but it's just a good idea to visually look at what you're writing. So with that paragraph plus your 4 publications, does that look like it's taking up about a half page? That's good. If it looks like it's taking up a full page, you should probably cut it down. So I find that the best space is like 1 paragraph for your contribution, and then 4 publications, and that takes up about a half page. So just something to eyeball and to be aware of. Like, just don't go overboard, but nobody's going to sit there and actually count the lines for you necessarily. So if you have to go over a little, I think it's okay. So in addition to listing any peer-reviewed publications, you can also now list research products. So that they specify can be non-peer-reviewed publications, any audio or video products. You know, if you've been highlighted in the news or something, you can list that. If you have patents, those are always really good to list. Any kind of like data, databases, curriculum that you've developed, instruments that you've developed, software, anything that you think displays good examples of what your contribution to science has been, you can list in those 4 items per contribution. So techniques to consider when writing your contribution, we think it's always really good if you can provide a title for your contribution, because it just gives the reviewer a good opportunity to skim what the topic will be for each one. Clarify your particular role. You know, especially for new investigators, a lot of times what you do is you'll work in the lab with, under somebody for a long time, and, the authorship's going to go to them, but you have done work, so a lot of times it's good to say, I worked in so-and-so's lab, this is what we developed, and then at the end you say, I provided statistical support, or whatever it was. So you're not taking full credit for that entire contribution, but you're saying what your role was. If you are in the position of having a very long career, you just had a lot of publications related to one particular contribution, it's always good to indicate that you have multiples, because you can only list 4. So a lot of times people say, I've had 50 publications in this topic, but here are the 4 most relevant or ones, the ones that have had the most impact. And then it just lets them know that there's more if they want to click on that URL, but here's the 4 that they should pay attention to. For newer investigators, do not feel like you have to use all 5 contributions. It's not required, and a lot of times, if you're earlier in your career, you're not going to have 5 to fill out. So just really concentrate on the ones that you have and make them sound really strong and really good. So if you're wondering about, you haven't done a lot and what could actually be a contribution, some ideas. I mean, a contribution can just be a seminal paper, one experiment, a series of related papers and experiments. It's just kind of think outside the box about what a contribution could be. As newer investigators, we're not going to, reviewers are not going to be expecting you to have revolutionized the entire field, but you can talk about what you've done. And then, as always, you want to emphasize what the impact and innovation is in those contributions, because NIH is always very interested in that. So for early investigators, these are just some techniques that we've seen early investigators use in the biosketches that we've reviewed that we think read very strongly. So one idea is describe work that's been done in the labs that you've worked in or work that you've done under mentorship, and then you just conclude your paragraph by stating what your specific role has been. If you're really early, like this is your first thing that you've done, just discuss your current work. And you can phrase it as like during my training or, something to let them know that this is really early on, just so that those expectations are set. We also think it's really good to just get together with other junior investigators or fellows, like people, at the same career level as you, and just workshop ideas together. I think a lot of times it can be hard for people to sort of objectively look at themselves, and you can get a lot of good feedback from people who are struggling with the same thing at the same time. Another technique is just to make sure that you don't overemphasize your importance on a project, but do clarify your role. So you don't want to make it seem like, in your first year as a fellow, you completely changed the landscape of, oncology medicine. You want to just really be specific about what role you had to play in that particular development. And then just be creative with your limitations, and also talk about your current engagement. There's all these things that you're interested in that you're currently doing that could lead to these great, wonderful developments, and it's okay to talk about that, because there's always this implication that your funded research is going to take you further and be able to create even more contributions in the future. So that's always something to keep in mind. NIH also provides advice for new scientists. I believe it's on the NIH Biosketch FAQs if anybody ever goes to look at it, but here's sort of just broken down what those key points are. They suggest that you consult more senior colleagues, like those that might be likely to be reviewers for a similar study section. If you have that kind of mentorship relationship, you can pass your Biosketch off to them and have them review your personal statement and contributions, see if they make sense, see if they read well, things like that. It's also important to realize contributions are evaluated based on seniority. So if you're early in your career, they're not going to be grading it or they're not going to be reviewing it in the same way that they're going to be reviewing somebody whose career is decades long. If you only have one publication, they suggest just summarize the key findings and its importance, and how it could lead to a revolution in science or technology or whatever. If you don't have any publications, you can describe your efforts on others' projects or papers if you are not a named author on them. If you haven't had any research thus far or no thesis experience, they say what you should do is list one contribution, which is what your training has been to date, and just kind of leave it at that. And as always, and this has always been the rule, but you are not allowed to include manuscripts that are in preparation or submitted. You can only list those that have been published or accepted for publication. So I get a lot of questions about this, and kind of a trick to working around it is in your contribution to science, you can actually write about the manuscripts that you are preparing. So don't talk about submitting them or anything. Just say, in the work that I'm doing right now, blah, blah, blah. And you're not listing it as one of your four, but you are talking about the current work that you're doing in that sense. So administrative components, since we're an administrative team, a lot of times what we do is we actually edit and review biosketches for the investigators. And I know that a lot of younger investigators do not have that kind of support, so these are just some things to keep in mind when you're making your biosketch. So you want to make sure that you're using the new format. So there's a Forms D that just came out as of May 25th, I believe, this year. It has a new heading section, and you just want to make sure you're using the right format. It just makes it look cleaner. It makes it look like you know what you're doing. Just make sure it's the correct one. If you already have a biosketch, basically what you can do is copy and paste sections B and D from your previous biosketch. There's no format changes to those. You just want to make sure they're up to date. And then, as always, in any biosketch, you want to make sure your biosketch is in the proper format. So that means when you're listing your publications, you still have to include your PMCID numbers if they're applicable. You always want to proofread your paragraphs for clarity and grammar. So previously, you could just list 15 publications and leave it at that, but now you're writing these narratives, and It helps that if they read well, if they're clear, if they make sense. If you don't feel like you have a good grasp on, grammar or anything, just, send it to a colleague who can kind of help review it and see if it makes sense from their end. And then you always want to check adherence to the space limitation. So that means making sure that it's not over 5 pages, but then also making sure that your contributions to science are not more than half page each in spacing. The most important thing that I think I can tell you is if you are putting in a link to your full list of publications, make sure that link works. And this is probably the biggest mistake that we get is people include links that when you send it to external people, it does not work. And so if a reviewer was to click on that, they would see nothing. And then it would be like, you might as well have not included it at all. If you're using a specific URL program, and we'll talk about them later, make sure to insert all of your literature into it. So a service like MyBibliography, which is tied into your MyNCBI account, you can pull in all your peer-reviewed publications from PubMed, but you can also put in, if you've done book chapters or entire books, things like that might not necessarily show up on PubMed or online, you can insert it into that. Through the entire document, you want to make sure formatting's consistent, so you're using the same page, the size, font, spacing is all kind of the same throughout, that your literature citations all use the same format. And then you want to check to make sure that there are a maximum of 4 publications in each of the sections with a maximum of 5 contributions. So a lot of issues we get, and this is more for faculty that have had very long careers, there's a lot of stuff to write, and it can create problems with the space limitations. So even with 5 pages now, it still can be really tight. So some tips and tricks. You can reduce the indent and paragraph spacing when you're writing your contributions. You don't have to accept, Microsoft Word's automatic indent space. You can make it as small as you need to, or eliminate it entirely. Using only 1 space between sentences seems really petty, but can save a lot of space in the long run. You can now, and this is on the NIH FAQs, but you can now use et al. For authors' names. So previously they would want you to list all your authors, and if you only have a half-page space contributions, that takes up a ton of space. Sometimes there's 20 authors on a publication, and that's just like a half page in itself. So feel free to use that et al. With abandon. Now, there's no requirement that you need to list all the authors' names. Although I do recommend that you leave in your own name and then et al. The rest. So typically what I would do is when I'm reviewing biosketches is I'll list the first 3 authors and then an ellipsis, then your name, and then another ellipsis if you're not within one of those first 3, just to indicate that there are additional names that are being left out. It helps if you use standard abbreviations for journal titles. So PubMed has standard abbreviations that they use, and you can just co-opt those. It helps save a lot of space. And then obviously you want to check the space limitations. Our trick that we use is we copy and paste the contribution onto a separate document just to evaluate its length within a full page format. But a lot of times you can just eyeball that. So section C also has a new option is you can include a link to a full list of your publications, as we've mentioned before. So the new instructions say, they say, provide a URL to a full list of your published works in a publicly available digital database. The new addition for 2016 is that database has to have a .gov address. So the options that they would like they recommend that you use are MyBibliography /SciENcv. PubMed still technically is an option that you can use. It's a little more problematic. And then, or any other government-supported database. I don't know what that would be. I couldn't think of any, so I've left it there. And then ones that you can no longer use. You cannot use Google Scholar. You can't use your lab's website if you use that to keep up to date with your publications. And you cannot use ResearchGate. So the URL is optional. So if you're struggling with this and it's really hard and you can't figure it out, you do not have to include it, but we highly recommend it, as I think it is helpful for reviewers to be able to have the option to go look at your full list of publications if it's available somewhere. So I just want to talk about MyBibliography a little bit. So if you have an ERA Commons username and login, you can log into MyBibliography. And what it does is it allows you to be able to pull in your publications from PubMed into MyBibliography or SciENcv. And if you have a really common name, it might pull in publications that don't belong to you, but it gives you the option of checking and unchecking which publications really do belong to you. And then if it's missing some, you can go in and insert by hand all the other missing publications. So we did this for a faculty member who had publications starting in the 80s. Some of them were not in English, and so there was a lot that we had to manually add by hand, and it can be tedious because each piece of information has to be entered individually. So it's, last name tab, first name tab, and it took quite a while to do that, but we found that if you're early enough in your career, you don't have a whole lot, you don't have, 300 publications to deal with. If you just keep up to date with this and make sure that your MyBibliography is up to date on a regular basis, it makes it a lot easier when the time comes to actually submit your Biosketch, and then you're not scrambling to add missing publications. So as part of the same program as the MyBibliography, there's also NIH offers this program called SciENcv, which stands for Science Experts Network Curriculum Vitae. We've personally found this program to be a bit problematic, but I'll just tell you what it's supposed to do. Essentially, it allows you to create biosketches in different formats. So it'll do the new NIH format. It does NSF. Supposedly, they're adding more formats coming soon in the next few years, I guess. If you have an administrator, you can assign them as a delegate, and then they will be able to actually help you edit your SciENcv Biosketch. And all they have to have is an AA assigned ERA Commons username. Admins will know what that's about. And that allows them to get in there and add your publications for you. If information's not been updated for a while, it will have to be entered manually, which I mentioned earlier. But the publication section will be able to pull in information from PubMed, so you can kind of import your list from there. And then there's tons of tutorials online that can kind of walk you through some of those issues. So just a warning that we've tried to use this a couple times. The formatting itself is still a little problematic. So when you put all your information in, you can export your SciENcv Biosketch as a PDF. A lot of times the fonts will be bigger than they should be, or the fonts will be really big and really small, and the spacing is off, and they've got this one issue where if you try to put in what your role is on a research grant, it will default you to be the PI, even if you're not the PI, and you need to contact IT support to have them fix it. It's very problematic, and they're aware of the issues. They're working through them, and we just feel like it's important for you to be aware of this, because if you read the NIH FAQs right now, it says that SciENcv is not required for now, which to us implies that it will be eventually. So it's good to just be aware of this, but I would recommend that you start with the MyBibliography option and just make sure that your MyBibliography is up to date with your publications, and use that for your URL. And don't worry about using SciENcv to actually create your Biosketch at the moment. I feel like I already went over most of this. Let's see. So MyBibliography, so this is one that's also strongly recommended by the NIH FAQs. It can be labor intensive for those with distinguished careers, as we mentioned. The more publications you have, the more you're going to have to add in. But you do have the ability to save your citations from PubMed that are already there. You can add delegates to help you edit. You can enter citations manually. It also allows you to view whether your publications are in compliance with the NIH PAP for awards, in case that's something that your department or CTSA checks up with you on. We do it yearly, and so this kind of helps faculty stay on top of that. MyBibliography, so in MyBibliography, it will give you a URL that links to all those publications that you've entered into the system. So this URL is defaulted to being private, where only you can access it. So you can check the box to make it public, but just to let you know, the link that it provides you for the public one is a different URL than the private one. So even if you click that box and then you include your URL, it is not going to work because it needs to be the publicly available link, which is different. Again, there's a ton of tutorials online for how to do this, although I think a lot of investigators have found it's a lot easier than they think, especially if you can just pull almost all of your stuff from PubMed anyway. Public links, public links versus private links can be tricky, so it's just best to test those before you send them off. So a lot of people think, oh my God, I don't have this kind of time. I can't sit there and add in all my publications and, you know, the grant's due in an hour. What am I going to do? So technically, PubMed can still be used as a option for as a link to your publication. So it's very easy to use, but just note that it's going to be the most inaccurate option. Because, for instance, authors with similar names can show up and are hard to filter out. Articles in which you're not an author, but in which you were cited can show up as yours. If you've published under a different name, that different name is not going to show up, or it's going to be in its own list, so the list might not be fully accurate. And then, obviously, it's not going to include anything that's not listed in PubMed. But if you're in a bind and you need something really quick, you can just go to PubMed, type in your name, get that URL, and copy and paste it in your Biosketch, and it works fine for now. So this is just a screenshot of a faculty that we looked up in PubMed. So we just type in Arab, L, see what comes up, and the first result and the third result are two totally different people. So just kind of an example of how inaccurate using PubMed can be. So that's my presentation kind of in a nutshell. So just to let you know, if you go to the ctsi.ucla.edu website, we have the YouTube video of this presentation. It's a little bit longer, and we also have a checklist and some guidelines if you're interested in knowing like how to format it properly, or you just want to make sure that you are meeting every single NIH Biosketch requirement. You can just go down that checklist point by point to make sure you're in compliance. You know, basically all we care about is that you are in compliance with NIH rules. And then, you know, we assume your science is great, you know, what you're proposing is great. We just want to make sure you hit all the administrative points that you need, because we wouldn't want your application to get triaged for some major mistakes. So you can definitely go to that website and look at our tools and tricks, and we have some more additional Biosketch resources there for you. I don't know if we have any time, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
We always have time for questions if anyone has any. Oh, hold on, Angie. Let me see. Let me hold up your question. Can we include conference proceedings and meeting abstracts and posters in the publication list?
No, you should not. So the workaround that I've discovered for this is that if you were, especially if you were invited, put those presentations in the honors and awards section, and then other things you can work them into the narrative of the contribution to science, but you should not list it as one of your 4 publications.
Great. That's great. Anyone else have a question? You can either type it into me, you can text me with it, or you can just say it if you want to say out loud. Amazing. People can actually talk too. Well, I think you can all figure out why I asked Robin to join us and why I emailed you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if it's okay, we have the Learn Rare Disease website. I'm just going to put this link that you gave us, and I'll put it on the website so that if people want to look some more, they can go play there too, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure. And I forgot to list my contact information here, but if you have any questions that people come up with afterwards, like, let me know. I'm happy to respond to email.
Yeah, and also you guys can email me, and I'll give you her email if you guys ever need it. So that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
and
sure.
Robin's going to hop off, and the rest of us, I'm going to show you on Learn RD where I put the examples that she was talking about, so you can look at them from there and a couple links. So if you want to stick with me for a minute, I'll show you where those things are on Learn RD. And Robin, you're always welcome, but you certainly don't need to stay. We just so appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and for everyone else, I'm going to take my screen back just a second. So now you get to see my screen. And here I am at the learnrd.com site. It looks a little bit different. I always laugh that I feel like I get upgraded every 20 minutes. This is Justice Stokas. He loves to upgrade us. His new thing is this tag the cloud feature. You're welcome to do it if you want to. If not, just scroll down past it, and then you'll see what you're used to seeing, which is my, I don't know where we got this picture from, but me, and then your courses. So a couple people have asked me, hey, can I see 2016 and 2017? And the answer will be a strong resounding yes. You'll be able to see anything you want this year, and then for the next 4 years that we have funding, for sure you can come in, watch anything you want whenever you want to. We're going to go to the 2015 because this is all a place you probably know, and I'm guessing you don't love, but at least hopefully you know it and think it's a decent resource. And if you scroll down to the bottom, what there is here is an assignment section. So as you guys heard, she said that it helped if you'd never done a Biosketch, maybe to have a group of people that look at it with you or brainstorm of how you could present something a little better, a little differently. I know that we have a few Canadian participants where they're not always having to do Biosketches, but you're absolutely welcome to join us if you want to work on a Biosketch or another type of CV. And there's a couple buckets here. So if you are an old pro and have done a ton of Biosketches and just want another person's opinion, you put it in this bucket. If you've done it but want more help group, you just open it, and where it says add a submission, you can put your Biosketch in here. And what we'll do in about a week and a half, I will make it so that we can all look at each other's Biosketches and give each other some feedback. And then on August 2nd, we'll actually go through some and brainstorm some ideas. If you're stumped with what to do for a Biosketch, we'll actually come up with some ideas for people. Maybe you're one of those people that didn't even know what a Biosketch was until today, in which case you pop something in the Biosketch what group, and that way we'll know that you might need a little bit more support for sure, and then you can just add your submission to that kind of bucket if you want. Also here we have the Biosketch template. This is the Form D that she mentioned if you've never seen it before. We have a link to some NIH examples. This is the frequently asked questions from NIH. In case you haven't looked or you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's where you can go and look at it more. I'll also put Robin's link there as well. So the other thing that I want to make sure everyone knows is a resource that we have going into this early fall and kind of rounding out our program. As you guys probably have noticed, everyone's still asking me for more statistics, so we're setting up another statistics person to talk to us, and it looks like it's going to be August. I have someone who said that they would do it for us in August. And then some of you have said, hey, I need more help. I need more ideas. So if you go back to that front page under courses, we've officially launched everyone into the CTSI course here at Children's National. Now you could do the good clinical practice, but what is really actually more helpful, probably in my opinion, is this thing called FACS. So if you click on FACS, it's the focus on clinical and translational sciences. Some of your CTSIs might have run FACS, in which case that's great. Use theirs, use ours, use whatever resource you need. What you can do is you can take a 12-question inventory that looks at kind of how do you approach clinical research, and then says these are areas where you seem to feel less secure or that you're having issues with. And then you can go through, and it's everything from how to write a grant, the nuts and bolts. I keep scrolling. There's just a ton of information on this website. If you did this entire course, it's about 80 hours of lectures. So that might not be what you're looking for. But maybe in your research you need some help with a certain type of study design. Let's imagine that you want something where you do quality of life measures. You can actually do a lecture from the 2012 Quality of Life course, and there's a link right here to that online seminar. So this might just be a fun place for you if you're kind of stuck and you don't know where else to go. You're always welcome to email me or give me a call. but this might be a fun place if you're not quite willing to talk to someone yet, but you might want to just go explore a little bit and see what resources might help move things forward. When I looked at the statistical approaches, I was hoping we'd be able to use these, but you actually have to pay and register for the Hopkins work. So that's why I'm trying to do a workaround for the Hopkins group. So sorry about that, there's not a stats resource here. But there is, UCLA did share their digital research and education, but it's not true stats. The one thing that is on here that's actually pretty fun if you haven't seen it yet is to go look at the NIH Introduction to Principles and Practice of Clinical Research, and they have some really down-to-earth lectures on how to do sample size and power size, how to do some very basic statistics, just enough to get that grant written, and also a little bit of how to know when to quit doing it yourself and when to get a statistician. So I just wanted to make sure that you all saw this. It's nothing required, but a lot of people have said that they wanted a little more information on that, so we went ahead and gave everyone here access to the Children's National CTSI site. So I hope that's helpful. And a lot of you might have something similar at your institution that you should also use for sure, but we just wanted to make sure you had as many resources as you could moving forward. Oops, there you can see the link to the SQL map. Close that tab, come here. Okay, so we are going to wrap things up unless anyone has questions for me. Any questions, anyone? Great, we're so glad you joined us today. As always, thanks for logging in. You'll get an email just reminding you that if you want to be part of having someone else other than yourself look at your Biosketch, that you can pop those into the online, and we'll make sure some other people read it and we'll pass them around and give you some feedback on your Biosketch. If you would like someone who's more senior to look at your Biosketch, one of her other recommendations, let me know. If you don't know your RDCRN coordinator, they've agreed to read Biosketches for anyone in this group. If you don't know who they are or don't know their email, happy to help you out with that and make sure you know who you should send that Biosketch to get some feedback. So I'm going to stick on the line for a couple minutes in case anyone has questions, but thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you guys have a great end of July. Have a good summer. Bye, guys.
Bye.